kind of random.
What does joining Hip Hop Now's Patreon mean? It means supporting the kind of hip-hop content that keeps you updated on the latest hip-hop news and moves. It means supporting the production of content like That Time in Hip Hop and Hip Hop Now Reviews. It means you care about the conversation and preservation of hip-hop music and culture. Hip Hop Now Patreon supporters get access to bonus content, merchandise, and more. Support the movement. Become a supporter of Hip Hop Now podcast today at patreon.com/Hip Hop Now.
Coming up on this week's episode of Hip Hop Now podcast, Kendrick Lamar reached out to Big Sean after hearing Deep Reverence. Conway the Machine finally drops his debut album. And Mary J. Blige reminds new fans of who the original queen is. In hip hop. That's what I'm talking about. Let's do it.
Let's get right to business.
Read these headlines. This album must be gone. This album must be gone.
Classic album.
Permanent Hip Hop Podcast. What up, y'all? I'm your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast, a podcast designed to catch you up on all things hip-hop, music, and culture that happened throughout the week. Returning listeners, you know what it is. Appreciate you. Hope you shared this, but you probably did share this because new listeners, I'm glad you came through. Hope you stick around. Big shout out to the patrons over at patreon.com/hiphopnow. And a special shout out to a brand new patron. Shout out to Jamal, who came in at the My Summer Vacation level. And if you know what Patreon is, you know what to do. You can go visit there and check out everything that's there. But if you don't know, and the promo in the beginning of this podcast didn't do enough to inform you, let me just briefly tell you that it is essential to the future of this very podcast, Hip Hop Now Podcast. At the beginning of 2020, pandemic aside, social justice aside, I figured I'd see how important this podcast and its content was to people who listen to this podcast. So my goal was to start a Patreon and get support from the people who are listening to improve upon this podcast. So again, I've said this before in other episodes. It's not necessarily what other people do. Other people get Patreons because they want to quit their job and be full-time content creators on the internet, which is cool, but that's not what I'm doing here. I'm actually taking your donations and putting them directly into the podcast. So if you visit the Patreon, which is at the link in the description, patreon.com/hiphopnow, for those who have exclusive access to some of the behind the scenes stuff, you're seeing everything I'm doing. Everything, literally everything I've added to this podcast thus far to help with the production. I document it. I make videos, take pictures. I write posts about it. So everything you see on that page, if you're a Patreon supporter or a patron of Hip Hop Now Podcast, goes directly back into the podcast. And I'm using one of those things right now. I'm using a couple of them, but one in particular to help better this program. Also, becoming a patron of Hip Hop Now Podcast, you also get timed exclusive and some exclusive content, meaning bonus episodes where I'm not doing the news every for an entire podcast. I'm focusing on one topic at hand. The latest bonus episode was about 4 albums that when they dropped, I thought they were whack. And they were from artists that I either admire or like a lot, or that I have a general interest in. But when these 4 particular albums dropped, I thought they were whack. But in 2020, I decided to go back and listen, and I reevaluate how I feel about each album. And that's a bonus episode that only is available to patrons. And it's only done for those who to show my appreciation to those who support the podcast. So it's not necessarily about picking, one listener over the other. You don't have to donate. It's not mandatory, but I would appreciate it if you did, so I can show you all the great things we're doing behind the scenes. Patreon.com/hiphop now is the website. Check it out, go through it, make your decision. There's also merchandise there. And also, if you I don't know how to spell Patreon, the link is in the description of the podcast you are listening to right now. Big shout out to hiphopdx.com, allhiphop.com, thesourcemagazine.com. Let's get right into the business, though. So, Big Sean put out a brand new album. My opinion on it is I don't have an opinion because I'm not really a Big Sean fan. So, I know I can't listen to a whole album of Big Sean. I don't know what it is. I think he can rap. Basically, I think he can rap. But I don't think he's as good as some think he is. I think he can be at times. There's times where he's definitely got bars. But then there's times where I feel like he's, I don't know if it's his voice. I don't know what it is. But in his song featuring Nipsey Hussle, which was the lead single to his album, the song is called Deep Reverence, and he talked about his situation with Kendrick Lamar. So I'm just going to go over this briefly. But if you didn't know, Kendrick Lamar and Big Sean kind of had a little bit of a beef, mostly lyrical, throwing subliminals at each other, going back to what I like to believe. And I believe this is the case, but it seems like every time it's reported, the reporters don't really talk about it. But when Kendrick Lamar did the Control verse, you remember Control, right? When Kendrick Lamar put out that crazy verse that some looked at as a diss towards Jay Electronica, who was also on the record, Big Sean, J. Cole, Drake, mostly all the rappers rapping now. But it was more of a call to action to hip hop for people to step up their bars and their lyrical skill, and let's really get at it. And I loved the verse. I loved him for that. This was a song that was supposed to be on Big Sean's album. It didn't make the album for obvious reasons, because I believe Kendrick Lamar was a little hot about, not Kendrick Lamar, Big Sean was a little hot about what was done on that record. Honestly, I think it was stupid to leave it off because it was an attention grabber. Sure, it didn't really grab the attention of, I guess, Big Sean fans or Big Sean. Maybe he didn't like the fact that it was not shining a light on him. But nevertheless, they had their differences and beef since then. Quote, I'm putting up air quotes when I say beef. And really hadn't been on good speaking terms since then. Well, when Big Sean talked about his feelings openly and basically showed some love to Kendrick Lamar on his new record with him featuring Nipsey Hussle, Deep Reverence, Kendrick Lamar was compelled to call him and not only thank him for the love, but show support for the song and Big Sean. So they are on speaking terms. It's all good. My opinion on it, because that's what we do here, I think it's cool. I think it's kind of sad that it took so long for them to get over that, to be honest. But who knows? I'm pretty sure there was some business stuff with that happening and it also not making the album, even though it was the biggest thing going as far as the conversation at the time. I just felt like, I'm just glad. Now, I don't want them to do a record like Kendrick. We anticipating your album. Word on the street is he was seen filming a video recently. So we're anticipating your album, right? I'm good if you don't put Big Sean on it. He's on Nas's album, King's Disease. It's become probably the track I skip on that album. Not every time, but most times. So we good. We don't need y'all to collab. We good that y'all together. Mary J. Blige, in a recent interview, reminded everyone that, reminded fans. Let me not say everyone. Reminded fans of Nicki Minaj, Cardi B, and Megan Thee Stallion that Lil Kim was the real trailblazer. Now, some of you young cats might get in your feelings and feel like, well, why she got to talk like that? Or, yo, we already know. And to that I say, it has to be said, though, because I think, and maybe this doesn't have much to do with Cardi B, or maybe not even Megan Thee Stallion as much, probably Nicki Minaj more than anybody. But there's an extreme influence there that was established by Lil Kim and Foxy Brown to a certain degree also. The sex appeal, the female rapper who can rap but got the sex appeal, the over-the-top, over-sexualized everything in her music. Lil Kim started that. Even the Barbie, let's not pretend like she ain't start that either. We know that that's like a Nicki Minaj thing to most fans, but just go back to the notorious K.I.M. I mean, I believe Kim says it on the song. It was already happening years earlier. The blueprint was already laid by another female rapper. So when you say her name and you see her in public, you need to bow down. Lil Kim was doing it first. You know what I'm saying? And some will say, well, is that something even to be proud of? I think so, because it's because of what Lil Kim did that basically laid the foundation for the careers of these individuals we just named. You don't get Nicki Minaj exploding in the way she did. And it's don't tell me like, oh, but it's because of the way she raps. Lil Kim raps better than all three of them put together. Let's keep it a buck, right? Let's keep it a buck. It's not the same kind of rap, so I don't usually like to compare them, because somebody like Cardi B, even Nicki Minaj, you're not expecting them to be, extra lyrical with it. Lil Kim was like the chick in the cypher that could rap, but she's not dressed like a dude. Like typically you got that's the thing I think a lot of people forget, right? When we start naming some of the greatest female MCs of all time, as far as whether they had ghostwriters or not, as far as like MC like Queen Latifah, those images, they kind of wore the baggy pants most of the time. They kind of dressed like the dudes. They kind of sound like the dudes. They came across like the dudes. You knew they were women, but Rah Digga, you know what I'm saying? The image was more harder edge, whereas Lil Kim and even Foxy Brown, it was more about flaunting a woman's sexuality instead of trying to play down to be trying to basically be a man but be a female so that men will like your music. But Lil Kim and even Foxy, but probably more so Lil Kim, showed that you can be a 100% woman, still got to spit, but men and women will still like your music. And that's the point, right? Because if this was a different setting, you're not getting songs like WAP. Lil Kim made it okay for that. I mean, come on. She was saying, I'm drinking babies and all kinds of deeper than she was going in way before these records were out. So let's just keep it a buck. And it doesn't take nothing away from the newer artists to say that, right? Lil Kim had her time. But you cannot ignore someone who did it first and did it years ago. Years ago. So let's not pretend like it's new. Let's like it for what it is. Whether you like Nicki Minaj and Cardi B and all of that, but let's like it for what it is. But let's not try to disregard the past because it's older. When the past is what laid the foundation for, some of your favorite artists to be here. Lil Wayne was initially pissed. His iconic F is for phenomenal lyric was ever released. I guess it's supposed to be never. This is on hiphopdx.com. It's a song called Yes featuring Pharrell. And what's the line? I'm going to read a little bit. Around the 1911 minute mark, the topic of one of Wayne's most iconic lyrics came up. This was Okay, so this was an interview with Lil Wayne's former manager, Cortez Bryant, who chopped it up with Fake Shores Drive's Andrew Barber. And this is kind of what he was talking about. The line in questions appears on the 2009 song Yes, which finds Wayne rapping, Yes, I Do It Big, Call Me a Little Astronomical, Wheezy F Baby, and the F is for phenomenal. I remember that. The word starts with PH, but he said F, right? Bryant said. He was like, oh, ish, I got to change that. We released it. We had an argument about that. He not understanding the concept about digital is gone now. We had pressed tons of CDs, but he didn't realize he spelled it wrong, and I didn't catch it. Yes, definitely one of the faux pas. And let's keep it a buck, right? Lil Wayne, I'm not going to take anything away from Lil Wayne. You know what I'm talking about. Around that time when y'all was trying to say Lil Wayne was better than Jay-Z, y'all know y'all was wilding because lyrically he was never better than Jay-Z, Exhibit A. Because he had a number of lines like that. You know what I'm saying? And I can't tell. Sometimes you can't tell if he was trying to be funny, like by saying something wrong, or he just thought he could say what he wanted. And I think a lot of times when you trying to say someone is, better than somebody like Jay-Z lyrically, once you start trying to say somebody's better than anybody lyrically, that means you need to pay attention to lyrics. You need to pay attention to the Jay-Z's lyrics. You need to pay attention to Lil Wayne's lyrics. And you need to know them so you can instantly think of comparisons to say yes or no. And when you think of a line like that, where he's saying F as far as the initial for the sound in phenomenal, not the spelling, but the sound, and he didn't do it on purpose. He probably just, I don't know. But a couple of people missed it. Somebody should have caught that. Imagine being in the studio and you hear him say that line. I don't care if you knew you're not supposed to speak. I got to be like, excuse me, Mr. Wheezy. Hey, yo, phenomenal don't even have an F in it. Forget starting with it. We had a couple of releases this Friday, like every Friday. It's been a lot dropping. One, Young Boy Never Broke Again. Some of us old heads didn't know that that's what Young Boy NBA stood for. He dropped the album called Top. Conway the Machine finally dropped his long-awaited debut album, From King to a God. Bobby Sessions dropped the album called The Price of Freedom. B.O.B. Wow, B.O.B. dropped an album called Somnia. Wiz Khalifa also dropped a mixtape, I believe, but I don't have the name in front of me. But let's go back to Conway real quick. Now, this album is like, I know I said debut, but this album is Conway's coming out party, meaning this is like his first official debut major label album. Featuring, the name of the album is called From King to a God. The album has production, all-star production from DJ Premier, Alchemist, Havoc, Murder Beats, Crisis, Derringer, Hit Boy, Eric Sermon, and Beat Butcher. I'm telling you, man, that's like Illmatic type of all-star. I'm not saying Illmatic the classic and all of that. I'm not comparing them. I'm just saying when Illmatic came out, that lineup of producers was crazy. So is this. It also has a couple of guest features as far as MCs from Freddie Gibbs, Method Man, Westside Gun, Benny the Butcher, of course, and Lloyd Banks, among others. Yes, Lloyd Banks is back. He can still spit. I listened to the album and I think this album calls for a review, to be honest. Now, y'all know this year I kind of started to separate the reviews from this particular podcast because they tend to take up some time. And I think if you're going to review an album, you need to be thorough in your explanation as to why you like it or dislike it or whatever. So those are typically separately. But one rule I had made for my album reviews was I was only going to review albums that had a large conversation around them. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't matter whether it's the best albums of the year. Some albums that are probably the best of the year I haven't even reviewed. But it's more about the conversation around them and how big the album is. And I think with Conway the Machine, after all of these years, after all of these releases, I mean, he got classic mixtapes. You know what I'm saying? All of this music that Griselda's put out, and for this to be like his debut, I think it is worthy of a review because he is basically the driving force that is Griselda Records. I mean, it was his bars first. Honestly, I've been looking forward to the debut album of Conway the Machine since before he got shot, and unfortunately, his face was somewhat disfigured as a result. It's been that long now. I know we've had more than enough in regards of material to basically feel like we're getting enough music from him, but it's totally different. I'll say this about this particular album. I kind of feel like this is more of an impression because I've only heard it once, but I feel like this is more of a production. So if you've heard Conway mixtapes, quote unquote, other albums that wasn't his major debut, this feels and sounds more like an album, meaning those other joints are dope beats and rhymes, but this is more or less conceptual skits, just a lot of thought put behind it and varied production. That is the biggest thing, varied production. I read you the list of producers here, and when you hit play on this joint, it shows easily. It shows you that this is not what you typically get from a Griselda production. I know West Side Gun is supposed to also be dropping, I believe, at the end of the month. You also have Armani Caesar. I believe you have a Benny the Butcher somewhere also, maybe October or November. So there's a lot of Griselda coming, but there's a lot more on a I don't know. It's difficult to say official because it's not like what they put out didn't sound official or didn't sound great, but I don't know, more focused as a project. Let's say that. Most of the stuff you hear from Griselda is beats and rhymes. This is in hooks, but this is a little bit more focused, not on every song, but I think overall it comes across that way. DMX recently appeared on Rough Riders Chronicles, which I believe is on BT. I haven't watched the Rough Rider Chronicles or the No Limit Chronicles. I think that's something I'll probably watch once they're all done so I could just binge them all, because sometimes that week-to-week stuff just gets to me. But he appeared on a most recent episode of the documentary, The Rough Riders Chronicles, and he was getting choked up when he was talking about his multiple personalities, meaning, and there's names for them, Earl, X, and DMX. So 3 of them, Earl, X, and DMX, supposedly live all within the mind of DMX, and he doesn't like talking about them, which is crazy. But I think in some respects, I think there's a lot that hip hop can learn from DMX's experiences in general, because hip hop has this thing, right, where hip hop as a culture wants to be young forever in the music it makes. There's always going to be younger artists who are new and great and blah, blah, blah. But they kind of follow the same traditions as far as being immature on the microphone a little too long. You know what I'm saying? In hip hop. Not saying, I mean, we the ones to buy it, so there you have it. But I think, there's a lot that can be learned from the mistakes of a lot of these artists who still have a draw. Because it's one thing to dismiss an artist who, was hot back in the 80s or early 90s that no one cares about today, which is unfortunate. But it's another thing where specific artists have a draw and they've made a lot of mistakes, like a Nas or a Jay-Z or Jadakiss and the Lox. And they air those things out on the mic, Other MCs could hear that, younger MCs could hear that and say, yo, I can relate to that, and maybe they start writing about those things earlier, making the music a little bit more interesting overall, rather than, a track here, a track there, or wait till a MC falls off before he starts to tell you about who he really is beyond the money and the cars and everything else. If you didn't know, 2020 has been a slow year for hip hop, slow year for rapper sales, but in 2020, Lil Baby is the first artist to go double platinum, thanks to his album, My Turn. I've never heard his album, but I will say this. You turn on the radio like I do sometimes. Sometimes we both turn it off when mumble rap comes on, right? Not everything is mumble rap, but that's how an old head would categorize the music. But when I do listen, and I pick out the ones I like, every time I hit the Shazam app, you know what I'm saying? When you're like, I don't even know what this is, let me pull out the app. Lil Baby's name is always on it. And I'm like, I might have to listen to an album because every time he's featured, I like it. That doesn't mean I'm gonna like an album, but I mean, it shows you I don't really have a bias. If something sounds good to me, I can't fight it after a while. If I'm liking it enough, I need to check it out. So Eminem recently explained why LL Cool J's Mama Said Knock You Out, the single, is a classic 30 years later. Now, this is kind of like a no-brainer for anybody who was around, but let's see what Eminem had to say. Mama Said Knock You Out was such a blank to me. It was such an unorthodox hit. It's another way that I'm saying LL has been such an innovator, because a song like that, for a song like that to be a hit, he is so raw on that song. That something like that could something like that could become a hit. Oh, that something like that can become a hit. It just changed the whole game. Wow, it's hard to read those things sometimes. Okay, and I kind of see what you're talking about there. It's not a typical LL Cool J hit, right? It's not a typical radio hit at the time. It's really like a hardcore hip hop record. But to counter Eminem, I'll just say this. It came out at a time where people had way more respect for lyricism and for hardcore hip hop. So if you put out a hardcore hip hop that energetic with that video, then yeah, it was going to be a hit back then, because the fans were into records like that. You know what I'm saying? It was different, but the fans made that a hit, and they respected lyricism a little bit more. So it's easy to see how that can be a big hit. Speaking of Eminem, if you don't know, if you aren't subscribed to this podcast, recently I did a Eminem tier list. If you've been subscribed to this podcast, you already know, but I'll explain it to y'all anyway. A tier list is basically where you have 4 categories. You can, from top to bottom, you can make the top 1 classic, and let's say it's 5 categories. And you can make the top 1 classic and the bottom category or tier trash, right? And then somebody like me takes a catalog from Eminem or discography from Eminem, and I rate each album in those tiers from classic to trash. Now, I always like to I don't know. I like to make sure that my tier list isn't using the words classic or trash or hot or lit. It's more so catered towards the MC who I'm judging or placing in this tier list. So when Eminem at the top, I got Rap God, and at the bottom I have Stan. And I basically go through his discography and break down why I think each album falls into its chosen tier. Now, there's an audio version, which if you're subscribed to this podcast, you already know, you've already received it. It dropped earlier this week, but there's also a video version of it. So you can go to the video version. You can see the album covers at least. You can hear my explanations. You can see where I place them. The link is in the description of this very podcast episode. Eminem Tier List is on YouTube. It's on the channel, my channel, called the B-Roll Network. B-R-O-L-E Network. Check it out. Check the other tier lists out. I did one for Common and like Ghostface and Snoop Dogg and all of that. So check that out. Leave a comment in the comment section below and subscribe to the channel. That's going to do it for me for this week. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Vegas World INC. And please know that this podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. So it doesn't matter if you like, yo, I only use my Apple. Well, it's on Apple Podcasts. Yo, I'm on Android. Well, it's on Google Podcasts. Well, yo, I only use third-party apps. It's on everything, fam. All you got to do is in the search bar, search for the words Hip Hop Now Podcast, subscribe, and stay locked in. Don't forget to support the Patreon at patreon.com/hiphopnow. Until next time, y'all, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace. Drop it on the random.